Welcome to Where Parents Talk. My name is Lianne Castelino. Our guest today is a professor of psychology at the University of Texas at Austin and a researcher whose work has appeared in more than 100 scientific journals. Dr. Cristine Legare is also director of the Centers for Applied Cognitive Science. One area of her research focuses on the role of the mind in facilitating learning, creating, and imparting culture. Dr. Legare joins us today from Austin, Texas. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to our conversation.
And such an interesting line of work and research that you're in with respect to learning and how children learn. And we want to really talk to you about some of the basic tools that parents, you believe, should have in their arsenal when it comes to the back to school playbook in terms of how their child is learning.
Some of the tools that I would highlight are, they are a range of tools that span things like the types of capacities that are going to promote learning new material, learning challenging new material, persevering in the face of obstacles. So some of these are cognitive, some of these are social and emotional. There's a whole suite of capacities that promote academic achievement, and a lot of the capacities that get the most attention, things like focus and learning how to do computation, or learning how to improve your reading skills, or memorizing more science facts, for example, tend to get a lot of attention. But I think a lot of the process skills, or sometimes they're called soft skills, things like creative problem solving, hypothesis testing, persevering in the face of maybe some frustrating challenges, are even more important. And I think these are really the places that parents can provide additional practice and support for their children.
So why do you believe that those process skills perhaps don't get the attention that you think they deserve?
It's a good question. It's not that educators don't realize those are important and don't value them. Certainly they do. I think that a lot of traditional school curricula focuses much more on discrete and measurable content. And there's a number of reasons for that. And certainly building up your knowledge base is important. But I think a lot of what children end up doing in school focuses disproportionately on memorizing new information and building up that knowledge base. And I think there's a growing interest in practicing the types of skills that are readily generalizable outside of the classroom, as you're supposed to be preparing for the world. And so a parent can provide a lot of opportunities to take process skills that are that maybe don't receive quite as much emphasis as they maybe ideally could in the classroom into spaces outside of the classroom.
So let's talk about process skills then as they relate to elementary school students, and how specifically parents of that age group of students could better support their child learning those process skills.
Sure. So maybe one really concrete example would be children's museums. So children's museums and other informal learning spaces that are clearly meant not just for children, but for families to learn with their children. These environments are ideally suited to the type of more open-ended exploration that I think is perfectly suited to process skills. So if you think about a children's science exhibit where maybe you're learning how to build simple machines with pulleys, going with your child there and having a more open-ended challenge where you identify a goal and work together in collaboration to figure out how the parts fit together and why some parts might not fit together and how do you troubleshoot and come up with new ideas when maybe something isn't working quite as expected, and how to persevere when maybe it's a bit frustrating when things don't work together immediately, because that can be frustrating for a child. and for adults in some cases. So these are the sort of open-ended exploratory spaces that build creative problem solving, troubleshooting, and also some of those socio-emotional skills, perseverance, and persisting in the face of frustration.
Let's take that same concept of process skills development by parents for their children and apply that to the adolescent teenage age group. What does that look like, and how can parents better support them?
So socio-emotional development certainly does not stop in adolescence. I think it receives a lot of attention in early childhood for obvious reasons, important reasons. But self-regulation, for example, the ability to direct your cognitive and emotional energies into achieving goals that often require multiple steps, setting sub-goals in order to achieve a larger goal. It's exactly the sort of activity that adolescents need a lot of practice with, and focusing their attention in the face of quite a lot of distraction, for example. So one of the things that parents can do with adolescents is, talking to them about their interests and their goals and the sorts of things that they would like to learn how to do, the things that are suited to their unique interests, and figuring out ways that they can learn in collaboration with their families and with their parents. So adolescents are very interested in choice. They're very, very interested in practicing their own agency and applying that agency to learning new things, not just educational activities overtly associated with school, but things that respond to their interests in a kind of more holistic, broader way, and harnessing maybe hobbies, for example, in structured ways that allow them to practice self-regulation and, again, some creative problem solving. So really harnessing their interests, I think, is very, very useful. Makes it more interesting and engaging for them too.
It's so interesting because when you use the word hobby, it's almost a word that we rarely hear anymore.
Yeah.
Those of us of a certain age group really love the word hobby, like myself. But, now I feel like a lot of parents, and certainly I can include myself in this category, have gone the way of structured activities for kids, whether it's team sports or something else. What is your thought on that in terms of helping kids understand developing process skills in that environment?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. There are pros and cons of all different types of activities. So team sports are tremendously valuable. They promote all sorts of different, everything from eye-hand coordination to teamwork to good sportsmanship. Great example of something that promotes physical and motor and cognitive and socio-emotional development. So I'm a huge fan of team sports. That said, there's a lot of other activities that are useful for children that provide some of the same benefits, but some unique benefits having to do with learning an instrument, or learning how to construct machines, understanding kind of the physical causal processes associated with machinery and that kind of thing. But it's also nice to have space for children to be unstructured and to follow their own interests, and even to be a little bit bored at times. I mean, one of the things that worries me a lot about social media and the omnipresence of screens is that we can always be stimulated by these kinds of devices, and children are more and more stimulated, not just by this, but by a growing number of activities. So having at least some space for a child to be, their mind to be free and open enough to be alone with their thoughts, to process their emotions, to think through their maybe their day and how things are going. Having some of that just downtime to process, I think, is really helpful. And I think children and adults have much less of that than we used to.
Let me ask you, with respect to where learning and how learning takes place these days. Certainly technology has completely shifted that around in many ways. The classroom is no longer the only place that learning occurs. And I wonder, what how would you characterize the general impact of these changes and of these different platforms and modes of education on how kids are learning?
Well, I think that there are always trade-offs. So there are many wonderful things about technology. They provide children with access to information they didn't used to have. But they also constrain the sorts of experiences that children have. Because it's certainly the case that the classroom has never been the only place that children learn, right? Children have always learned in children's museums or running through the forest or having a picnic with the family or spending time at the lake feeding the birds, that sort of thing. So it is I think the challenge with technology is that it is increasingly encroached upon those sorts of more organic spaces that families have traditionally spent time in with their children. And more, they have moved towards these electronically mediated experiences, which are not always solitary, but are often solitary. So these educational learning platforms do provide an opportunity to connect with people on the other side of the world or on the other side of the city or with children on the other side of the world, the other side of the city. So there can be an opportunity for connection, but they also can be quite isolating. And it is not uncommon to see a whole family interacting with technology alone and yet in the same room. So I think being mindful of best practice in using these technologies, but also putting a limit on them. So there is time to connect very directly in ways that are not mediated by screens.
As somebody who researches this topic, who is a psychologist, all the different things that you do, I wonder, when you look at the pandemic and its impact on how kids are learning, and the fact that parents, for at least 2 years, have had a direct front row seat on how that learning is taking place. What do you think the impact of that has been on kids and how they learn now, having parents understanding how a lot of that learning is taking place in school?
Well, I think that on the more positive side, this did provide parents an opportunity to spend more time with their children, to learn a little bit more, or maybe a lot more, about the content of what children are being exposed to in classrooms. The trick with the recent experience with technology is that you can't decouple technology from what was in fact a very scary and traumatic experience for many people. So the experience of technology and the experience of learning together, there were positive aspects of that, but it was also a very unnatural period of social isolation. So yes, children are spending time with their parents in the context of these screens, but there were many, many stressors in the backdrop of that, or that were happening at the same time, where children weren't interacting with their peers in the same way that they normally would. Parents weren't interacting with their peers, with their extended family. So I think there's such a mixed bag associated with that particular time frame. I think that would have looked differently. If we could pull apart the learning experience part of it from the pandemic part of the experience, I think maybe it would have looked quite a bit different. Another kind of complication here is that we were thrown into this with really no preparation and kind of scrambling to figure this out together. So I would say the whole context of that was tremendously suboptimal. Mm-hmm. And the fact that so many parents were able to be flexible enough to kind of figure this out is quite commendable. But at this point, I think stepping back and thinking, okay, what about that? What are the positive learning aspects of that? What are the silver lining lessons that we can take from that? Now that we have returned to some, to normalcy to some extent. But yeah, I think there's a lot of processing that people are doing.
When you talk about a playbook for parents with
Yeah.
respect to supporting how their child is learning, why do you believe it's important for a parent to even have a playbook?
I think that there's that thinking about parenting as having a toolkit, being equipped with a great variety of different sorts of tools to support your child in flexible ways. I think that's very, very helpful because children have a variety of different challenges and lots of different, things, opportunities, but also challenges pop up all the time. So the more tools a parent has in their toolbox, the more they can flexibly respond to what the child might need at any given point. Maybe based on challenges with particular type of content or subject matter. There are different challenges associated with different ages, right? Where some of the challenges that adolescents face, children in earlier middle childhood don't face, and also vice versa. So a toolkit that is responsive to the age of the child, to the unique challenges that a child might have, to their unique personality and interests. I think all of those, being able to adapt to all of those different variables is very, very helpful because children are not one size fits all. Every child is a unique and precious organism that has their own gifts and their own challenges. So having a diverse toolkit allows parents to really support their unique child.
When you look at the curriculum, depending on the age of the child, then you look at the process skills that you've described, and you look towards the future and the jobs of the future and the 21st century skills that we've all heard about, collaboration, teamwork, things like that. Can you paint a picture for us in terms of the impact of knowing these process skills on that scenario as we continue to move forward?
Yeah, great question. And there's been a lot of coverage, concern about how best to develop these 21st century skills. And the reality is the economy has changed. And the types of skills that a lot of employers expect are, exactly the sorts of things we described, creative problem solving. And those are the sorts of skills, troubleshooting, hypothesis testing, that require often very active, hands-on exploration of more open-ended problems that often are solved in collaboration with other people. If you think about, how the software industry works, or many industries, it's not solitary memorization by individuals, which is what a lot of schools spend a lot of time requiring students to do. They are, it's collective, open-ended troubleshooting and problem solving and trying something, iterating on that, getting feedback, getting ideas from multiple people, solving problems where, there's really no precedent for it, right? There's constant new technology and the development of new solutions to problems. So the more experience children get with activities of that sort, the more familiar they're going to be with that, the more empowered they're going to be, the more confident they're going to be in the face of uncertainty, right? So the way a lot of teaching occurs in schools, certainly traditionally, is that problems are given to children and a rubric for how to solve that problem is also provided to the child, right? That's not how, as it turns out, problem solving works in the world. Employers don't pay you to solve problems they already have solutions to. As it turns out, they're going to expect you to come up with those solutions. So the more we support children, and as it turns out, children are curious. They're interested in solving problems. They're interested in discovering new things. So harnessing that natural curiosity and openness to working together and collaboration, the earlier we start with this, the better. And parents can absolutely practice that sort of thing with their children, right? There's so many different ways that you can think about problem solving in the world and hands-on experience and working together. And I think that the more parents do that, in collaboration with teachers. It's not that teachers don't think these are valuable, right? they have a number of different constraints they're working on. But again, the more collaboration there is in developing these skills as early as possible, the better.
There will be parents who watch or listen to this interview and say to themselves, boy, you know what? I didn't really do that when my child was, K to 9, let's say, or, I wasn't really paying attention. I just thought it would be taken care of by the school. And now they're listening and thinking, well, you know what? I better get on top of teaching process skills. What would you say to that parent who perhaps is a little late to the game?
Well, it is never too late. And my guess is that for those parents, there are many ways, in fact, they have supported process skills, just didn't really realize it or didn't have the terminology for that. So there's, again, learning to cook with your child, practicing new recipes. All of those sorts of things involve things like process skills. When maybe a recipe doesn't work out the way that you anticipated, trying something new, and evaluating the outcome based on systematically controlling for adding different ingredients of different amounts. Those are process skills. So I think in more thinking about the learning process in much more inclusive, everyday sorts of ways. So spending time with your child doing activities together almost always involves process skills. And spending time outside of the classroom in, I mentioned children's museums. I work with Thinkery in Austin, Texas, and there's just an endless opportunity to learn in exhibits in open, unstructured ways. But cooking recipes together, going on a walk in the forest and identifying different, plants, getting a guidebook to discover plants in your environment, or bird watching, really tailoring these kinds of activities to things your family enjoys. That's going to be the most exciting and rewarding for everyone. There are really an infinite number of ways that you can deepen process skills at any point in ways that fit your family's interests. This is nothing that requires spending a lot of money or buying special things. It just involves getting in touch with your child's interests and having fun together in learning contexts. And there's just so many options for that.
Professor Legare, is there any aspect of this particular area of research that you've conducted that has really struck you as you are a parent yourself, and now looking at it through those eyes and that perspective when you look at process skills and how you support your child's learning? Anything there that really, you found surprising yourself?
Well, I've certainly been struck by all of the different ways that self-regulatory abilities impact a child's development. So there's been a lot of attention to things like delay of gratification or inhibitory control. These more kind of overtly cognitive skills are, deeply related to educational attainment, achievement, all sorts of different achievement-related metrics in school, and then even after school as children go into college and enter the workforce. So thinking about all of the different ways that the development of self-regulation can be supported in the schooling context, but also outside the schooling context, and giving children an opportunity to practice controlling their attention, practice harnessing their working memory, focusing on focusing on planning, focusing on identifying sub-goals to achieve a particular goal, following through, persisting in the face of obstacles. These pay off, the development of these skills pay off at every single point in development. And children of different ages need different sorts of support, but it is absolutely never too early to give children practice doing this, because it is a very whole child approach to socio-emotional development, cognitive development, even physical development. Practicing a sport requires persevering over time, learning how to throw a ball and catch it. If you think about, something like a sport, there's lots of different ways, even in very early childhood, that children can begin practicing that, getting fine motor control practice, persevering when learning how to throw that ball exactly where you want it doesn't happen the first time you throw it. That it, so supporting children in these self-regulatory abilities from an early age equips them with resiliency, with confidence, with the recognition that even if I can't do it now, I will be able to do it at some point if I continue to practice and I continue to invest in it. And not setting up an expectation that if there's not immediate mastery, that's okay. That's for complex skills. There's not going to be immediate mastery. Many complex skills require many years of investment, and taking pride in making progress towards mastery is just as important as that sort of final achievement.
There are many parents who will say to themselves, you know what? I don't want my child to have to go through that. I want to try to limit the amount of suffering, anxiety, negative, whatever that he or she is put through. What could you say to that parent in terms of why that might not be an optimal approach in teaching children process skills?
I love that question, and it's actually something I feel very powerfully about. I think that there's many things to keep in mind. I completely resonate with the desire to shield your child from frustration and disappointment. The problem with that is that life is full of frustration and challenge and disappointment. And optimal thriving is about how you react to those experiences and how you persevere in the face of obstacles. And children need child-appropriate practice at persisting in the face of frustration or challenge. If children don't get opportunities to practice that, it's like a strength, right? Socio-emotional strength. If you don't give children an opportunity to practice that, when they eventually do come very front and center with these challenges, they're not equipped to handle them, and often they're more likely to give up or to feel that, oh, there's absolutely no way that I can manage this, when in fact they can manage it. They just need some practice. So giving child appropriate opportunities to strengthen resiliency is the best gift that you can give your child. And not giving children that opportunity doesn't give them an opportunity to build self-confidence. You can't love your children into self-confidence. Self-confidence is earned, and it's earned through taking on challenge, being courageous enough to take a risk, and persevere in the face of that challenge. So true confidence requires practice. And you've got to give children that practice. It is absolutely the best thing that you can do for a child.
Lots of food for thought. Dr. Cristine Legare, professor of psychology at the University of Texas at Austin. So appreciate your time and your perspective today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.